For me, with Wings of Fire, once I knew I wanted to write about dragons, I spent a lot of time on the world building and on figuring out the different tribes and the map and all of that. But in terms of thinking about the stories, there's the map.
It's dragon.
It's dragon, that's right. But in terms of the story, it was actually very influenced by the fact that I had my first child, right as, actually, I turned in the outline. Just a quick thing, my outlines are always like, I'm going to write this, and then none of those things, actually. So my outline for books 1 through 5 that I sent to my editor, I turned in it like literally about 3 days before my son was born. Luckily, he was 9 days late, or this series might have taken a few more years to happen. But so I was having a baby, and I was dealing with like the whole parenting thing, and so I was thinking about, like I said, sort of fate and destiny and how your life is written for you or not. But I was also thinking about nature versus nurture, and I was thinking about how do we shape our children, and how much are they just going to be like that? So the 5 little dragons at the beginning of this book are stolen from their families, and they're raised by these really terrible guardians, sort of in an underground cave, because they're in a prophecy and they have to save the world, and the dragons who've captured them want to be in charge of how they save the world, which of course the dragonettes are not a big fan of that plan. But so I was interested in, what do they still retain from their families, and what sort of is instinctive to them, versus like what is shaped by their environment. And so one thing I say a lot is that I'm writing a lot of really terrible parents as reassurance that maybe I'm not at least that bad. And maybe even if I am, my kids can still save the world. So
as long as you're better than Prince Arctic, you're a good parent.
Yes, I hope that's the case. So that's a lot of what, especially books 1 through 5 are about, is that question of like, if they go back to find their families, what are they going to find? And how much they've created their own family, the 5 little dragons growing up together. And I think a lot of that has to do with Clay, who's the dragon on the cover of the first book. And I think of him, he doesn't think of himself as a hero, but I think of him as the thing that holds them together, because they just wouldn't be the same family that they are. They didn't have Clay as their big brother, basically. And then books 6 through 10, I went off in a different direction, and I started thinking about powers and like giftedness and what responsibilities we have as a result of having powers, or even not. What do you do if you don't have powers but you still want to save the world? So I kind of got into a little bit of that with those dragons. And I'd say books 11 through 15, right now I'm thinking a lot about empathy versus resistance to evil. No particular reason. So that's kind of what's going on with my dragons in books 11 through 15. And I had to come up, book 11 is on a new continent, so there are new tribes of dragons.
Are the old dragonettes of Destiny and everything, are they in the book still?
You'll get to see them again, yeah. So book 11 is very much focused on the new continent, and then 12 through 15 will slowly start figuring out how to bring them together. So, because in books 1 through 10, they don't even know the other continent is out there. But yes, so I'm really excited about it. That's coming this summer. Yeah, I've always loved fantasy too, but I actually kind of would read anything. So I grew up in South America, so we had very small libraries. It was like just a couple of these shelves, basically. It was what we sort of had to choose from. So I would read literally anything that I could get my hands on. Fantasy was something that I would, it would be my first choice probably. And the specific one I can think of is Anne McCaffrey, who wrote the Hearn series, which is dragons. And those were Dragon Song, Dragon Singer, and Dragon Drums were the ones she wrote for kids. And what's really funny is that my mom was a little bit of a snob about the books that we read, so she wouldn't let me read Sweet Valley. She wouldn't let me read even The Babysitter's Club, because she was like, I know, right? My son, by the way, is obsessed with the Babysitter's Club graphic novels, and I'm like, I'm getting to like relive finally what my friends were reading, But so she wouldn't let me read those because she didn't think they were like good enough for me to read or whatever. But she was paying very little attention to what I was actually reading. So I read the 3 Anne McCaffrey books for kids, and then I was like, I'm going to go read the other Pern books, and they get like highly inappropriate for children really quickly, just to warn you parents. But they were wonderful. I mean, I loved them. So that's one thing I read that was fantasy that I loved very much. But I read a lot of different things, and I've actually had a chance to kind of write a lot of different things too. I wrote a Pet Trouble series, which is about it's a contemporary realistic fiction about kids and their dogs. And I got to write historical fiction because I wrote a couple of Little House on the Prairie spinoffs under the name Heather Williams. So I've kind of tried everything, and I keep coming back to fantasy because I feel like that's where I can do the most surprising things, and I never get bored. So especially for me, like if I'm writing along and I do get bored, if I feel like that energy, that magnetic sparkiness is missing, what I'll usually do is like have another character appear with like superpowers, or like something explodes. And so I can't do that as much in I was once writing a fantasy and one of the Pet Trouble books simultaneously, and I was writing the scene where like the dog is running through the house making a mess, and then over here I was writing the baby griffins were just setting the town on fire kind of thing. So, and I was like, which of these is more fun? So for me, I that's why I think I love fantasy, and I think you can also write bigger. If you're trying to explore themes like what I was talking about, like in the Wings of Fire books, I could not write parents this awful if I was writing realistic fiction. Like, it would just be miserable. It would be the saddest stories in the world. So for me, the fact that they're dragons, I feel like I have a bigger, like more room to play, for sure. And even I've written other animal fantasy. I worked on the Warriors series and the Seekers books as well. And and with those, we still had to stick to, it was a little more like Redwall, we had to stick to some things, like, especially because the editor of those books was really keen on, like, keeping it realistic to what cats can do, apart from the talking to each other. And the rituals.
The Stark land.
Yeah, the Stark, yeah, exactly. But she was very, but this is a forest, and this is how cats smell, and this is the number, bears can only count to 10, was a note I got once. I was like, oh, okay. But whereas in Wings of Fire, it's like my world, and I can play with it completely, and the dragons have art and music and books and castles, and I feel like that gives me just so much room to play, and it's never boring. So I think that's why I love fantasy. It's great advice. And actually, I was the kind of kid who was like, no, it's perfect the first time. And my dad would always be, he's very like, I have many suggestions, and I'd be like, no. In my world, polar bears and penguins live in the same place. Don't talk to me. So it was a joke in my family that I was the kid you couldn't criticize, because I'd freak out. But then I went to work in publishing. So I was an editor for several years, working at different places in New York City, and it was so helpful to be on the other side of it, to be the person giving that criticism or those notes, because it made me look at books and think about how do I make this better, and it made me realize that's what other people were trying to do to me, too. So I think I'm a little better. I still have to stomp around the house for a while after my notes come in, and being like, no, they just don't understand me. But so it's getting to see the other side of publishing was probably the most useful thing that happened in my career, because it also made me realize that if someone says they don't want to take your book, it's not personal, and I saw that so much. I saw so many books come through, and it helped me sort of see what books are special, like what makes a book special, but also that it might just be the wrong person, So once you start submitting, don't get discouraged. But also, I think, try to love the writing more than the publishing side of it. I definitely, for me, just being at my desk writing is the part that I love the most. And I think that was true when I was a kid as well. I loved the writing, and I want you to think about your writing as it's just something that you love to do. And I'm sure you guys do, otherwise you wouldn't want to be writers. It must be because you have a passion for it. And so worrying about the publishing part can come later. But keep that love of the writing.
You're never going to get a rejection letter from your desk. And if you do, then you're in one of our fantasies.
The other thing that I would say